questions from the Zoom chat box or from the Facebook Live comment section. However, we do encourage discussion in the comments by all means. So not all candidates will have the chance to answer each question. We randomly selected which candidates will get asked what question. And for some questions, all candidates will answer the question. For other questions, only 3 candidates will answer, and for others, only 2 candidates will answer. So before we let the candidates introduce themselves, we would like to go over a couple community agreements. We're asking everyone to please be respectful in the comments. Any bigotry, racism, or homophobia in the comment section will not be accepted. If you do not follow these guidelines, you will be kicked off the call. So the candidates will have 1 minute to introduce themselves, and we'll be going in alphabetical order. So we will begin with Cindy.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Cindy Banier, candidate for Congress here in Southwest Florida, Congressional District 19. I'm a Democrat running for this seat. I'm a mom and small business owner, and I'm fighting for our water, our health, and our community. I was compelled to run for this seat because I had spent the last 10 years working with nonprofits around our community, working to make it able for them to serve the communities better, being more efficient and effective in reaching people. And I happened to write a lot of reports, and I would give them to leaders, telling people I'm going to take their voice to leadership and that it mattered. And every time I would write such a report, the leaders would pat me on the head and say, thanks, and not do anything about it. And this compelled me to engage in this race, to be the servant leader that the people of Southwest Florida deserve.
Thank you, candidate. David Holden.
Hello, my name is David Holden. My pronouns are he, him, his. Very happy to be here tonight. I was the Democratic nominee for this seat in 2018, and I hope to finish the job in 2020. We are facing 2 crises today, unlike almost anything in living memory, the pandemic and the associated economic catastrophe, and that is hitting young people harder than almost any community in this country. And we have absolutely failed young people. The leadership in Washington from the Trump administration and from the Republicans in Congress has simply not been able to meet the demands of the crises that we are facing. I hope to bring a new vision and a new voice to this community and to the halls of Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate. Christie McLaughlin.
Hi friends, my name is Christie McLaughlin. I'm a 24-year-old Republican running for Congress here in District 19. I'm a lifelong resident, born and raised here in Southwest Florida. I went to Florida Gulf Coast University and then Ave Maria Law School. I'm proud to say I'm a lawyer, a certified teacher, and I have participated and served this community for my entire adult life the past 6 years with Mother Francis de Sales Auxiliary for the Homeless and volunteering with my party. I am so excited to be here today because just as Pamela pointed out, it is an unchangeable part of who we are, our identities, and we are young people looking towards the future. And that's why we're here today. Regardless of whether we disagree on certain issues, we are still working hard to fight for our future as young people, and our young voices need to be heard, particularly when we bring innovation and new ideas into Congress. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, candidate. Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan Severson, Top Gun Navy fighter pilot, veteran legislator, Christ-centered family man. I served the state of Florida and my country for 22 years as an officer. From the Indian Ocean to Washington, D.C., both flew my aircraft both at night and during the day in storms, calm seas, from Australia to the Philippines, and protecting you and your families and the constitutional values that our liberties give us. I was recruited after I retired from the Navy by the Speaker of the House in Minnesota, ran for the legislature, was elected and served 4 terms in the majority and then 4 in the minority. 2 as a minority whip, and I served on a number of committees there, housing, public health, finance, transportation, a lot of others. So I've gotten a lot of experience and heard a lot of testimony in terms of what our government does, what it's about. And I'm excited to be here, listen to some of your voices, some of your concerns, and hopefully have a great discussion. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you, candidate. So before we go into our round of long answer questions, I just want to let the people on this call know that we are offering interpretation. So if you would like that, we do offer that. So our first,
Y en español también, para las personas que necesiten interpretación, tenemos interpretación, solo oprime el círculo que dice interpretación en la pantalla suya y usted va a poder entender y hay interpretación en el lenguaje del español. Gracias.
yes, thank you. So we will actually begin with a round of rapid response where candidates will have 10 seconds to answer. These questions can be answered with a yes or no, or with one word. So I'll pass it over to Fleener for this.
Thank you so much, Pamela. So now on to our rapid response portion. The order will be Sydney Bonnier, David Holden, Christie McLaughlin, and Dan Severson. The first question is climate change real and man-made? Sydney Bonnier.
Yes, yes, undoubtedly.
David Holden,
Yes, without a doubt.
Christie McLaughlin.
It's a yes and no answer because it's a combination of both the natural effects and the man-made effects that have caused the recycling of the earth that we are facing right now.
Thank you. Dan Severson.
I believe it is not a man-made event. I believe that it is a cycle that every 1,500 years, our earth goes through a cycle, and that's what's taking place right now.
The second question. Thank you guys for your answers. Recognizing that all lives matter and are important, do Black Lives Matter to you? Sydney Bonnier.
Yes, Black Lives Matter. I think that we need to recognize that there are people who have been oppressed in this country and that some people have privilege and that all lives matter, absolutely, but certain people need protections more than others because of the experience in this world.
Thank you. David Holden.
Black Lives Matter. And it's important to understand the history behind those three words.
Thank you. Christie McLaughlin.
Yes, of course, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. And it's farcical to say that there hasn't been a history of discrimination, but you have to protect all people and, work towards equality.
Thank you. And Dan Severson.
Absolutely, Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. Even the unborn lives matter. And so
on to our next question. Do you support a $15 minimum wage? Sydney Bonnier.
I support a $15 minimum wage, and even beyond that, making sure that our living wages are manageable enough for us to actually live our lives here. So that actually means that we would need to go beyond 15.
David Holden.
I support a $15 minimum wage, and I consider it a good place to start.
Christie McLaughlin.
No, it's going to cause increase in prices that'll actually be more damaging to the economy.
And Dan Severson.
No, unless you want to pay $15 for a McDonald's hamburger.
Okay. Will you vote for a Green New Deal with a just transition? Sydney Bonnier.
Absolutely. We need more outcomes-based policy, particularly around the biggest issues that we face, like climate change.
David Holden.
Absolutely. I'm also supporting Governor Inslee's Evergreen program.
Thank you for that. Christie McLaughlin.
I actually read the entire Green New Deal. No, it is so ambiguous and so full of issues. Absolutely not.
And Dan Severson.
No, I do not. It's economically unsustainable. It's not even attainable, and it doesn't make any sense.
And this one's a lighthearted one. What is your go-to grocery store? Sydney Bonnier.
I have 3 small children and I don't leave the house, so I use Shipt, Target.
David Holden,
Whole Foods.
Christie McLaughlin,
Publix, holler at those pub subs. Hey.
Good
and
job.
Dan Severson.
Aldi's.
Thank you, candidates. That concludes the rapid response question. I'm going to pass it on to Pamela for the next section.
Thank you, Fleener. Thank you, candidates. We collected questions and concerns from participants, and we have broken them down into sections. Our first section is climate/environment. We have seen a growing concern on our college campuses on environmental issues, especially at FGCU. Environmental issues in the region, threaten community landmarks, and residents are concerned. Southwest Florida is known for its beautiful beaches and sunsets, making it an important aspect of our local tourist and snowbird economy. So for our first question, candidates will have 1.5 minutes to answer. In 2018, national attention turned to our state as our waters turned guacamole green due to a harmful bloom of blue-green algae. This impacted our health, wildlife, and local economy in Southwest Florida. How will our environment be a priority for you? Dan Severson.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Our water is one of our major resources, obviously for tourism, for just quality of life. And a lot of that has been put on the back burner. It hasn't been adequately addressed. Part of that is the Kissimmee Basin that drops down into the Lake Okeechobee. When we get heavy rains, it overflows. That blue-green algae is then dumped by the Army Corps of Engineers into the Caloosahatchee and then over towards Stewart. It's a huge problem. Part of the solution on that is to lower the water level at Okeechobee during this dry season, and then allow when the rains do come that the Okeechobee can actually hold the capacity. But we have to clean up the Kissimmee River Basin. There's a lot of failed septics up there. There's a lot of things that are creating nutrient loads into the Kissimmee River that then go into the Okeechobee. And until we do that, we're just kind of putting a bandage on the problem. We've got some good work that is going in terms of mitigation by water reparation areas and some of those that are around there, but we need to do more. And as your congressman, I will definitely work to bring federal funding in to help clean that up.
Thank you, candidate. Christie McLaughlin.
The environment is paramount to our health and our welfare in Southwest Florida. I'm a lifelong resident here, born and raised here. My first swim was in Southwest Florida waters. So it is not only my pride and joy, but it is so essential for our health, especially given the respiratory issues that arose in 2018, for the welfare of our community, real estate, tourism, and our economy in general. Not to mention that our waters are so vast, it actually affects interstate commerce. That means the entire nation. So of course it is a huge priority. Now we know that in 2018 or 2019, Governor DeSantis established the Blue-Green Algae Task Force, which also included the creation of the Office of Environmental Accountability and Transparency. And those are important steps into cleaning up our waters. But most importantly, as a congressperson, it is an important investment. We need to have reactive measures for the damage already done and proactive measures for what has arisen with the algae blooms and is continuing to be an issue here. We know many people in my primary, in the Republican primary, were actually in power state representatives at the time that the algae bloom arose. And we know that they don't have a good track record with protecting our waters.
Thank you, Christy. Cindy?
Yes, thank you. Our water is one of my top priorities as well. I am a very big proponent of making sure that polluters are held accountable. The state of Florida has not done well on this. And you couple that with the fact that the administration, the federal administration under Donald Trump has defunded and derailed the EPA consistently. What I would do in Congress is make sure that we have the appropriate funding and oversight by Congress for the EPA to do its job to make sure that we are holding polluters accountable. Of course, we need to make sure that we also have discussion with the Army Corps of Engineers and how we manage the water. There is too much federal control over when the waters are released and at what level, and it is very much dictated by corporate lobbyists. So that's something that I would absolutely be advocating for, to make sure that we are not only managing the environment and the water in Lake Okeechobee, but that we're also being considerate of our estuary health and the businesses that are functioning on the beach every time that we release those waters down the way. So we need some control over that, and we need to have a good working relationship and more power over what happens, and not just leave it to the jurisdiction of the Army Corps of Engineers.
Thank you, candidate. David?
Thank you. In 2018, we actually had two environmental crises. We had the toxic algal blooms and we had the red tide. And we may very well have both of those again this summer. So I urge everyone to look at the Evergreen Action Plan, which was first put forward by Governor Inslee of Washington, and his team has taken that forward. And it is a roadmap to building a strong economy based on clean energy and green jobs. The problem there are many parts of this problem, right? And Governor DeSantis only looks like an environmentalist standing next to Rick Scott, who was a catastrophic governor by every measure, but especially on issues of environmental protection and care. And when you consider that tourism is by far our #1 industry, it's really appalling at the failure of Republican leadership, both here in Florida over the last 25 years and nationally. The Trump administration is in the process of rolling back over 100 critical environmental protections. So you can't be pro-environment and support a party that is continually defunding, voting against environmental protections, and undermining our ability to have clean water and clean air.
Thank you, candidate. So this concludes our section on environment and climate. I will pass it over to Pamela that will take over our next section.
Thank you, Pamela. And thank you, candidates. So candidates, the entire country finds itself in the middle of a global pandemic, which is illuminating existing disparities in our healthcare system. Healthcare is amongst the most debated topics during these unprecedented times. Florida has consistently ranked among the top 5 states with the most people without health insurance. Studies show that medical emergencies rank as the #1 contributor to bankruptcies. Due to state regulations, single individuals between the ages of 18 to 26, the poor, and communities of color are left the most disproportionately without health insurance. Do you favor a specific proposal to reduce the number of uninsured Americans? And we'll start off with Christie McLaughlin.
Well, right now there's not a specific proposal that exists. My proposal is to have a free market for healthcare. The issue is that the rising prices are due to the fact that there is no competition. So I propose that there be allowed for health insurance purchasing across state lines, the purchase of foreign drugs. So there is a competitive issue that causes the drug prices to be lowered and healthcare prices to be lowered. Healthcare is extremely personal. No one can really decide the benefits of what you need for your healthcare except for you and your doctor. And that's why Obamacare was a very detrimental legislation that existed, because it took away that personal liberty and the personal choice of healthcare. And it was an extreme infringement of rights and government overreach. That said, for our healthcare system, what we need is to have removal of barriers and obstacles in creating drugs. We need to have more access to purchasing drugs across state lines and for foreign countries. So there's competition, and the purchase of insurance across state lines as well. So there's more competition and lower prices.
Thank you. And I will remind the candidates to please speak slower. I know since your times that can be a little stressful, but we are trying to use an interpreter, and they require to be able to both understand what you're saying and interpret it. So a little slowly, please. Next candidate, Dan Severson.
Yeah, thanks for that question. What Christy was saying is correct. Once you create competition, you put even playing field across the state lines. Now you have more participants in that process, and you can lower the prices. I think the other thing that is needs to be addressed here is Medicaid, and those are state dollars that come from the state to assist in low-income individuals. And if we have a fairer system, if we have a system that is more competitive instead of what Obamacare gave us, which was a enormous cost increase with limited access, you begin to make it more equitable across the board. Now, those dollars that were typically used for the underinsured or those uninsured now become available to a smaller group, and it can address those issues. So I think in terms of health savings accounts, across the border, portability for insurance issues, and competitiveness between the hospitals, all of those will be cost savings. And then you put in concert with that Medicaid that the state sponsors, you get a more of a focused emphasis on those who are in need, in specific financial need.
Thank you. And on to Cindy Banye.
Thank you. So health and life are a right. And I think that it's really important that we reform our system to make sure that everybody has affordable access to care and not just health insurance. I do not believe that the market model has worked well in the United States. We do not have a market and we cannot create one. Part of the problem is that there's extreme profiteering within our system. I am in favor of a version of Medicare for all. I have lived in 2 countries with nationalized healthcare that have some of the best health outcomes in the world, and one that's been touted as having some of the best public health responses to the coronavirus, and that's Taiwan. Both of those places have low costs. Both of those places have a culture where people can go and get treatment and get preventative care without fear of bankruptcy. These are things that do not happen in the United States. The other thing that we need to consider is that we're looking at massive job losses because of the coronavirus. And when you have employment that's tied, insurance that's tied to employment, you are creating a further public health disaster. We need a system that would require cost setting from the government down, because this is a public good, not a market competitive environment.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, candidates. That concludes the questions. Oh, sorry. I started off a little wrong. We have one more question within the health section, and I'll again try to remind all of you to speak a little slowly, at least slower, so that the interpreter can interpret. So recently, Title IX redefined. Huh?
Did I not get it? I did not get a chance to answer that question.
We are only giving we are only picking a certain amount of people for each question. And so for the last question, we had 3 people. For the next, we'll have 2, and it will circulate like that through every question. So on to the next question. Recently, Title IX redefined rape, making it harder for students to report rape on campus. In Florida, we have seen a parental consent bill passed. Now there are federal versions. At the federal level, would you support a parental consent bill that requires young people's parents' parental consent to receive abortion services? David Holden, you're going to start.
Thank you. First of all, I would not support a parental consent law, and the Supreme Court has spoken to this in 1989. We would hope that a young person who became pregnant, an unplanned pregnancy, would be able to go to their family or their caregivers and receive the kind of loving support to help that young person make the right decision for themselves. Unfortunately, that is not always the case in this country. And often young people who become pregnant are in situations that are not safe for them, where they do not feel that their concerns and their interests will be handled well. And in that case, they have a right to seek an abortion. Abortion is healthcare. And women should have the same rights to make their own healthcare decisions that men do in their own lives. We have to get to a place in this country where we provide universal healthcare, which is a human right. If we want to reduce the impact of abortion, well, there's things we can do. We can ensure that young people are taught about their own fertility. We can make sure that birth control remains free and widely available, and we can fund adoption services for those that want to use that service. So no, I would not support a parental consent law.
Thank you, David Holden. We'll move on to Christie McLaughlin.
First, to discuss the preface of the question regarding rape, less than 1% of abortions are the direct result of a rape. So I don't think that has anything to do with the concept of abortion. But as for abortion, I am pro-life without exception, other than the health and the life of the mother. Life begins at conception, and with as much access to contraception that we have today, we do not have any right to murder another life for the sake of convenience. Now, I would definitely support a parental consent bill. The 1989 Supreme Court case should be overturned. Roe v. Wade should be overturned, and we need to defund Planned Parenthood. Life is a constitutional right, explicitly stated all throughout the Constitution, and if life begins at conception, then abortion needs to be overturned and completely outlawed.
Thank you, candidates. That concludes the questions on health. I will now pass the mic over to Fleener for our next section.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you, candidates. According to studies conducted by the Florida Policy Institute, the Prison Policy Initiative, and the Bureau of Justice Statistics, Florida continues to report a higher incarceration rate than the national average. For-profit prisons and the detention centers pose a direct conflict of interest in trying to decrease the rate of incarceration. The criminal legal system disproportionately affects communities of color and the poor, and their ability to apply for jobs, housing, paying bail, etc. Experts in communities largely agree the main goal should be to keep people out of the criminal legal system. For our section of mass incarceration, the first question is, mass incarceration has destabilized communities for decades. Black people constitute about 17% of the population, but about 39% of the incarceration rate. There are attendees of this call directly impacted by this problem. Our families need solutions to bring these numbers down and keep families together. What policies have you seen enacted in other districts that have a meaningful impact on decarceration? Will you pursue similar action if elected? This question goes to Cindy Bonnier.
Yes, thank you. Those kind of discrepancies are appalling, and they are a direct result of people and their biases, particularly in not only the criminal justice system, but in policing overall. And it's something that I am continually worried about. I am also very concerned about the profiteering in the private prison system in the United States. What I would be in favor of is moving towards a legalization, particularly of marijuana and other small time possession, to try to give people their life back and allow them to be expunged and released from prison. I think that alone will help to reduce the prison populations and make a big impact on those discrepancies when it comes to race in this country. I think that also we need to have a bit more of some training related to implicit bias when it comes in our policing system, and to make sure that we are also having the same kind of impacts in our criminal justice system, making sure that there are not harsher penalties applied to people of color.
Sorry, thank you, candidate. This question also goes to Dan Severson.
Thank you for that question. And I think, incarceration rates are typically kind of a byproduct of failing family systems. And I think in order to really address those, we need to address the communities at large. I know that Secretary Ben Carson has got a great initiative that he's on the road. He was on the road until the COVID-19 hit, but it's on innovative housing and how do we build up our communities. I'm a strong believer in faith-based initiatives, that the community can be built up and it can be cared for by the people within the community themselves with the proper leadership. So I'm a big advocate for Big Brother programs, for those programs where the communities themselves have initiatives that can address that. And if we put into law where we're going to retract some of that incarceration rate, then we need to have programs there like Big Brother that can actually reach in and do the mentoring that's needed to bring those people out of that poverty, out of that situation, and get them into a wholesome area where the communities can thrive and grow. So to me, the families are really the key to this solution, and being able to support those families is a must.
Thank you so much, candidate. On to our second question. The increase in policing and zero tolerance policies in public schools has fed a trend of youth being pushed out of school and swept into the criminal legal system. Currently, Florida has the highest rate in the country of young people held in adult prisons. What steps would you take to dismantle the school to prison pipeline? This question goes to Christie McLaughlin.
Well, I'm very excited to answer this question because I am a certified teacher and I taught in both a first grade and a fourth grade classroom. And particularly in my first grade classroom, actually, you know what, both my fourth grade classroom as well, we had students who struggled quite a bit. Now, the zero tolerance policy comes from the fact that there is already being crimes committed. That means drug possession, possession of a weapon, an illegal weapon, etc. And that is where that reaction arises. However, the issue when it comes to school and the protection of those students, we need to take away the federal control of our schools. It needs to go back to local and state control. And we need to give more power to the teachers because the teachers are with the students every day. The teachers are the ones that know what is best for that student face to face on how to get that student back on track. So it's not about pushing the student out and just letting them run amok in the criminal justice system. It's about allowing the local control in the schools, again, to benefit the student to the best of their ability.
Thank you so much, candidate. This question goes to Dan Severson.
And I guess I would agree with that same model here, is that we, in order to get them to actually understand that they have friends, they have support on the outside, and the whole issue of being able to bring them together with people from the community. I don't believe the federal government has the answers that we need in terms of addressing this particular situation. I think it is a state and community local issue. The local is the one that can best meet the needs relationally. Whenever we get larger government involved, it becomes more of an entitlement than it does a relationship and a responsibility by people from the community to care for their own community. All of the loving touches that it needs to really take effect, to know that people, you don't really know how much people care until you find out how much they're doing with you and for you. So I believe that bringing them out of those situations into a community that is encouraged to meet those needs.
Thank you. David Holden.
Thank you. I think it's important to remember that the government is us, right? The government is communities coming together and making decisions about what's in the best interest of themselves and their families. And we as a people in the United States form the government. And it should be and must be, again, our servant. And it is not today for many reasons. So getting specifically back to to what's going on in the schools, I went to public schools in New York City in the late 60s and early 70s, which was not a particularly good time in New York City. And there were no police officers stationed in our schools. I think we have to reduce the number of police officers in schools. And I deeply respect the job that police officers do in our communities, but they're not teachers, they are not counselors, they are not social workers, and students need to be met with love and compassion and not escalated quickly into the criminal justice system. And we also know that the preponderance of these actions that put young people into the system, into the criminal justice system at an appallingly young age, fall disproportionately on Black and Latinx communities across the country, and especially here in Florida.
Thank you so much for that answer. And finally, Cindy Bonnier.
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought this was one that I wasn't going to get to answer. But I am very happy to answer it because I do have a history in education, as well as an early childhood educator, as well as a Florida Gulf Coast professor as well. But this is really important when we think about how we treat children. And I was writing down on my note, trauma-informed care. It goes back to making sure that we treat every aspect of the child, mental health and education, and not just assuming that people are acting out because they are bad people. Typically, children are acting out and getting in trouble because they have had a traumatic upbringing. And if we have schools that are trained and implementing trauma-informed care, we will eliminate the education to prison pipeline, particularly for students of color who come from a community that is disproportionately affected by trauma. So I also agree with the fact that we should not be relying on school resource officers to be heavies in the school. They should be the liaison to the community, but we should also be investing in social workers and case managers, as well as de-escalation skills in our teachers to make sure that we don't have situations like when we had that young kindergarten student being hauled off in tears by a police officer because she wanted a snack. That needs to end in this country.
Thank you, candidates, for your answers. This concludes the questions on mass incarceration. I'm going to pass it to Pamela for our next section, and we will also be asking all the candidates to answer each question now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Fleener. Yes, so moving forward, all candidates will be asked each question. Now that we have less candidates participating, we have more time. So for our next section is immigration. So immigration is an important topic in the state of Florida. Many industries in Florida, such as tourism and agriculture, as well as local economies, depend on the labor of immigrants of all statuses, even undocumented. So each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to answer each question. So in light of the current pandemic, farm workers are among the most vulnerable communities that are being hit the hardest at this moment, yet are receiving minimal, if any, resources and protections, putting them more at risk in the fields. How will you protect the livelihoods of the folks who do life-sustaining work to feed us through their labor, bringing fruits and vegetables to homes across the nation? Cindy.
Yes, this is a very important issue. I think when it comes to immigration, we need to recognize the place that employment and labor has in it. And I think if we work on making sure that we have appropriate labor standards, particularly in agriculture, that we will have less of an issue when it comes to the abuses of the immigration system. The other thing that I would advocate for is make sure that we reverse the course around immigrants and the availability of immigrants to seek status in this country. We have a situation right now where if people are seeking support, and this is particularly true in times like this, if you get food support or any sort of benefit program and you're an immigrant, you will actually preclude yourself from being able to get documentation that you need or get on the path to citizenship. And this is not a fair situation. People are coming here to make a better life, and they are working, and they're a vital part of our economy and our workforce, and as we're seeing right now, of our food system. And they need to be respected as humans and as part of our workforce and economy. And I am absolutely somebody that will fight for that and for not only protections in labor, but also for immigrants and all people seeking a better life.
Thank you. Thank you, Cindy. David?
Thank you. It's sad that it's only in the face of this pandemic that we realize how essential these workers are to our communities and to our country. And this administration in particular has treated immigrants as criminals. They have made it almost impossible for people to seek asylum, which is a human right. And they have made it clear that immigration, which is what made this country as great as it is today, is not something they're interested in for people of color. So we have a lot of work to do, but this is work we have done in the past. In 1986, President Reagan signed bipartisan immigration legislation that created a path to citizenship. We are not going to remove 11 million undocumented immigrants who are a vital part of our communities. Enforcement needs to return to a focus on criminality and not whoever they can get their hands on. And people need to be treated with respect and dignity in the work that they do. So farm work is critically important work. People need a living wage. They need paid sick leave, and they need health care.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, it's a very good question. In any nation that is a nation that has established borders is only a nation if it has the rule of law. Part of that process is to make sure that the people that come into our country are coming in legally. But you said that, and I know that there are a number of people that have come in who have come across the borders. We experienced this last year with the caravans coming in, where we're totally unregulated. And immigration is one issue. National security is another issue. And so in order to contain that, we have to have the rule of law. Now, the individuals that are working out in the fields are by far and away are mostly law-abiding citizens. Now, they're not citizens, but they're aliens that have come in from another country, and they're doing work, many times work that no one else is willing to do. So I get that. And part of the process of what David was talking about is there has not been deportation of those individuals who are abiding by the law. It's deportation of MS-13. It's deportation of those who mean to do us harm once they come in and are a pariah in our society. That's a problem. Those who are law-abiding can be addressed in a new immigration policy that we need to take up that basically says, if you're here on a worker visa, we
Thank
have
you. Thank you,
conditions that you can
candidate.
meet.
Christy?
All right, I'll give you a two-part answer because of the two-part question. As for the issue on immigration, my family is Cuban. They immigrated here legally in 1961, seeking asylum from a politically oppressive government in Cuba. That said, it is an issue of national security. There is statistically a very strong correlation between human trafficking and drug trafficking with illegal immigration. So it is an issue of our national security. We need a strong vetting process. We need to ensure who is entering the country, when they're entering, and why they are entering, for the safety of everyone, and for the preventative measures of human trafficking, drug trafficking, and just substances entering the nation. As for the farming question, since that's not only an issue on immigration, it's an American worker issue, we need to open up the economy. The question is prefaced on the issue of the COVID-19 pandemic. What the workers are facing worse than the threat of the virus is the threat of the comorbidities of poverty and not being able to work. Therefore, if we open up the economy, we are actually doing a service to everyone to be able to get back to work, to receive the paycheck so they can sustain their lives again without dependence on the government, because that dependence on the government actually is more harmful and long-term will create worse issues with the economy and their own stability.
Thank you, candidate. So for our next question, deferred action for childhood arrivals and temporary protected status is currently being heard at the Supreme Court level. The decision will most likely require further voting from elected officials. Will you vote to give a pathway to permanent protection to the 800,000 DACA recipients, the 45,000 TPS recipients, and the 11 million undocumented people living in the US? We will begin with David.
Absolutely. Those are promises that need to be kept. And this is a much larger issue. To say that we are only deporting criminals is just an absolute refutation of reality. If you have been watching at all what ICE is up to, they've gone far beyond those parameters by direction of this administration to really terrorize communities. Yes, we have strong borders and we need strong standards, and we do have the rule of law. But we've also decided that punishing people for their desire for a better way of life is something that we should be doing as a people, and I profoundly disagree. But beyond the cases being argued, again, we need a pathway to citizenship for undocumented, law-abiding immigrants. And we also need to reverse policies like the 287G program. Anyone who knows me and have followed my campaign know that I am deeply opposed to those programs where agreements are made between sheriff's departments and the Homeland Security to turn deputies and police officers into ICE agents. It's been going on in Collier County for many years. It creates tremendous distrust and fear in the immigrant community and really does nothing to reduce crime or the impact of criminality.
Thank you. Christy?
Yes, so it's interesting what Cindy had stated earlier regarding the abuse of immigration policies. And the only abuse that's really occurring is actually the abuse by illegal immigrants walking all over our laws and entering illegally. That's an abuse of our national security and our laws. If you enter this country, you have to be a productive member of society and you have to assimilate properly. So as for DACA kids, it's actually, I am for a pathway to citizenship, but with strong vetting. And that means you have to acquire an education, you have to show you have a job, there has to be proper drug testing, because then you are a productive member of society. Citizenship is a privilege. As for TPS and all other illegal immigrants, I am not in favor of a blanket cover for, absolving and giving an entire pathway to citizenship, because immigration, it seems to be the only time in which we look to a crime and try to completely absolve the perpetrators. So that said, we have to treat this for what it is. It was a breach of our legal system, and therefore we have to act as such. If they leave the country and come back and do it the right way, it's a different discussion. But as for those that entered illegally, that is a breach of our fiduciary and them entering the United States in our safety.
Thank you. Dan?
It's interesting that during this immigration discussion we had recently, I think it was about a year and a half ago, that President Trump had put it on the table that those DACA recipients would receive amnesty and they would be on the pathway to citizenship. And that was turned down by the Democratic Party. So that kind of goes to show you, is this a political issue or is this really an issue in which we really want to address? I'm not heartless, and Republicans at large are not heartless. There can be a pathway, but that pathway means that they have to go to the back of the line, because we have people all over the world who want to come to America, don't have the convenience of being on the US border and walking across the border. They actually have to get their paperwork pushed through. If we put those DACA in front of them, we've done them a disservice because we haven't properly vetted them. We haven't taken a look at their qualifications. And for the United States as a whole, our interest, every one of us in this country, ought to be, how do we make America a better place to be? So part of that process should be proper vetting, and it should be the rule of law. And we are a country of the rule of law where all men are created equal and given the same opportunities, every one of us. Then someone's special and then someone's not special. That means someone else who doesn't get the same rights or the same treatment as someone else is mistreated.
Thank you, Dan. Cindy?
No es ilegal, all right? There's no such thing as an illegal immigrant. If you cross the border without documentation, it's a civil infraction. And that's nothing more than jaywalking or a speeding ticket. So the fact that we're thinking about criminalizing people for this is nothing short of absurd. I will also say that I wholly support a pathway to citizenship for both DACA recipients and people who are TPS. And I think it's really interesting that somebody who benefited from amnesty policies in terms of their family being able to get a better life in the United States, and from such lenient policies such as the wet foot, dry foot policy, would be so critical of people coming to this country seeking a better life. I will also say that I have actually been an immigrant in 2 other countries, and it's not quite as straightforward as everybody who just sits and has their birthright citizenship thinks. There's no such thing as go to the back of the line, because there is no line. Okay. And this is what the problem really is. You can't just simply say, go back and come back in, especially with the policies under Donald Trump, where they're not letting anybody into the country for any reason. So let's just set the record straight. People should be able to come here. People who are enticed to come here by work, who are tricked into coming here, do deserve the right to think about having their situation be improved through a legal pathway. Okay. And it's not as simple as just saying, go back to your country and get back in line.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, candidates. That concludes our section on immigration, and I'll pass it over to Pamela for our next section.
Thank you. Thank you, Pamela. We're going to cover the topic of LGBTQIA rights. Being the target of various political discriminations, the LGBTQIA+ community continues to advocate for its members and freedom on a daily basis. Florida state law does not address discrimination towards LGBTQIA+ in employment, housing, and violence. Statistics show that Black trans women are the most vulnerable to this type of violence and discrimination. Given that polls show that about 75% of Floridians support protections for LGBTQIA Floridians, what can you do to expand protections to these individuals who you represent? We will start off with Dan Severson.
Yeah, I would probably view that more as a state legislative issue than a federal issue, simply because those policies are made at the state legislative level. The federal level already has laws that are embedded in the Constitution. The federal laws that basically say all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, among those life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Constitution goes on to talk about equal justice under the law. Whenever you have a group that is identified as having more rights or more considerations than another group, you have just undermined the rights and the privileges of that larger group, and you've made them subservient to the other. So I'm a big proponent on everybody needs to be treated equal in that particular arena. And if there are feelings of discrimination or wrong redress, take it to the courts. Hire a lawyer and take it to your court to ensure that that redress is addressed. And that's across the board. That's regardless of who the individual is or what their disposition is.
Thank you. We'll move on to Sydney Banye.
I was already unmuted. Yes, so this is a very important issue because we do not have equality in this country. We do not have equality for women. We do not have equality for people in the LGBTQIA community. And by the way, I apologize for not earlier not saying my pronouns. I am she, her, hers. And I think that having that level of respect for people is important. It is true that people can be convicted for being a member of the LGBTQI plus community, and that's not equality. And I think what we just heard was the idea of when equality feels like oppression when you are privileged, and that's just simply not the case. Equality is not pie. Okay, you do not lose out when somebody gets equal standing. I think that we absolutely need to do more at the federal level to ensure that there are protections for all people and that there is equality across the board, and it is not legal to discriminate against anybody for any reason beyond their control, such as being born a woman or being a member of the LGBTQIA plus community.
Thank you. Christy?
So just to start off, I am a supporter of the LGBTQ plus community. I support them and I say, you do you, boo-boo. That is my mentality. But when it comes to federal protections, it is a state issue because it is a local issue. When there's discrimination, it is more of a local-based issue. The issues that New York faces are very different than that of Florida. Discrimination experiences are different in Ohio than they are in California. And that said, it is a state issue and a local issue. As for the federal law that was proposed, the Equality Act that was passed by the House and shot down in the Senate, the problem with the Equality Act was that it had several bases for discrimination. And I don't deny that discrimination does exist in this country against LGBTQ, race, women. It does happen. I'm not saying it's rampant, but it does exist. But that said, they had so many forms of bases for discrimination that it did not quite clarify as to the circumstances in which a discrimination occurs. What is the overt act? And that Equality Act was fraught with ambiguities and was going to be very detrimental, not only causing dependence for people in the LGBT community, but also causing more issues for a fair and free economy and the working class American.
Thank you. And David Holden.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier when we were chatting before we went live, this is personal for me. My mother and my father, Nikki and Harvey Holden, were gay, and I saw the impact of discrimination in their lives, in the lives of our family. I would fully support the Equality Act. In this forum and in the last forum where I had the privilege of meeting with Dan and Christie and several other Republican candidates, you know, it's great to say that you support human rights, but are unwilling to take any action to make sure that those rights can be enforced. And this is not a local issue. This is not a state issue. It's a universal issue. And I believe it has to be addressed at the national level. We've seen over the last 25 years that the Florida legislature and a string of governors have been unwilling to address discrimination in the workplace, in the marketplace. So we have to take action at the national level. Yes, we are all created equal, but there was a time when the Constitution countenanced human slavery, and we took action as a people at the national level to address and redress that wrong. And we need to do the same thing here.
Thank you very much. On to the next question. Recently, states have been proposing anti-trans bills, many targeting transgender children. Specifically in the state of Florida, a bill was introduced making it a felony for doctors to provide minors with hormone therapy or to perform sex reassignment surgery. If you were to be elected, would you support a bill protecting trans children? And we'll start off with Christie.
Well, it depends on what the definition of protecting trans children are. Of course, I'm against discrimination of trans children. Again, I think that's a local issue rather than a national issue, particularly due to the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. But when it comes to young children, and I guess this goes back to my teaching background, you can't purchase cigarettes until you're 18. You can't drive a car until you're 16. In fact, in contracts law, you actually can't even make purchases. You're allowed to go back and breach on contracts, and they're voidable on the minor's side. The minor can breach a contract because they're a minor. This all indicates that minors are not prepared to make life-changing decisions. So when it comes to the law making it a felony for doctors to do transitional surgeries on the child, it is not due to the fact that it's discrimination against trans people. It's due to the fact that at a young age, you're not even capable of making the most basic decisions for your life, let alone a life-changing decision. And that's why I am in favor of protecting trans children. But as for that law, I would support it.
Thank you. David Holden.
I would never support a bill targeting trans children, but I think we need to look at what's really going on here. This is a pattern that we have seen throughout the years where Republicans will try to use wedge issues, create fear and hatred. They did it with the bathroom bills, I think in the last cycle. They did it in 2004 with state level constitutional amendments against marriage equality, and they're doing it again here. This is an issue that is rarely come up. Creating, you can't say you believe in freedom and you believe in the paramount relationship of a doctor and their patient and then say, we're going to make it a felony if a doctor treats a patient in a way that you disagree with. I think this is just another way to scare people, to try to win votes. And I would never support a bill with the aims outlined here.
Thank you. Dan Severson.
Yes, I would not, as I understand it, you said that this bill makes it a felony for a doctor to perform the surgery. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. I would support that bill simply because I believe that, as was previously stated, that a child is going through the puberty and change of life has tremendous emotional issues. And those things are really stemmed in the values or in the family that surrounds them. The family is the support system. It can also be people who are being influenced from outside forces. So not until 16 to 18 would I consider somebody to be able to make a rash decision on what they are, who they are, and what they are going to be. And the unfortunate part of that surgery would be it's irreversible. Once it's happened, there's a life to live of regret if that was the wrong decision. And I don't think that should be made by a doctor or even by a parent. I think it needs to wait until 16 to 18 years old when they have a consciousness of who they really are.
Thank you. And Cindy Banye.
I just want to say I think it's really fascinating that people who say that we should, not make sure that there are parents involved in the healthcare decisions of pregnant teenagers. They're perfectly capable of making that decision at that point in time. But parents making decisions for their teenagers in other circumstances, that's unacceptable. This is a very, very interesting argument for me. In my personal perspective, I think that we need to preserve freedom in this country. I am not in favor of the law that was passed, making it a felony for doctors to do their job in a consenting healthcare relationship. The thing about freedom is that freedom means it's none of your business. Why? Okay, because that is totally a decision between the parent, the child, their doctor, because this is what ends up happening. With trans children, these treatments are often life-saving. It's an important part of their mental health to be able to move forward and have the care to be in the body that they need to be in. There may not be another year for them if these treatments don't happen at that point in time. And I think that freedom needs to be respected, and the guidance of the parent, the desire of the child, and the guidance of the healthcare professional needs to be admired.
Thank you. And we'll move on to the next question, but thank you very much, candidates. That concludes the LGBTQIA+ section. I'm going to pass it on to Fleener for our next section.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you, candidates, for your responses. The students of America are the future of our society. College and trade schools have become an essential stepping stone for many careers. This has pressured many young people into a lifetime of student loan debt. In 2019, it was reported that Florida's total student loan debt hit $75.9 billion. On the section of college affordability, the first question is, the level and quality of education we receive is fundamental to improving our individual prospects and progress of our society. Presently, the cost of higher education is unreasonable. Everyone, regardless of class, should be able to pursue higher education. What incentive will you give colleges to become more affordable and not just use all this government money to build fancier dorms and recreation centers? The first person is Dan Severson.
You tell me again, I'm sorry, tell me again that last part of the question, if you would.
The question is, what incentive will you give colleges to become more affordable and not just use all the government money to build fancier dorms and recreation centers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it does go to the core of our higher education system that has been kind of suitcased into this 4-year degree. When I was going through college, there was a vocational school that was in our community, and people kind of looked down on it. But you know what? Those individuals that went to the vocational school for 1 to 2 years, and my wife did that, ended up getting a career. And then when they had opportunity, then they went to get a 4-year degree if that's what they chose to do. But they were able to pay for it because of the vocational career that they had built in on that. So today, our norm is just go up to your eyeballs in terms of student debt. And that's the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do is get out there, start to work in society, go to a vocational school if that's what you want to do, to give you a profession that will actually pay you money. And then while you're in that profession, begin to get that education system that is taking you to your end goal. Unfortunately, and I was on our higher ed committee when I was in the legislature, I saw too many students coming through burdened with debt and unsure of where to go with it. It's a huge problem, and it's one that we need to address, but I think the way you're speaking to it is exactly what needs to transpire. In our system, we need to make a place where they can actually earn their way through.
Thank you so much. David Holden.
You know, I love when I hear boomers talk about working your way through college. You know, in the 60s, you could work your way through college for 2 reasons. One, college cost a fraction of what it costs today, and we made massive public investments in higher education in this country. And over the last 40 years, we've drained public resources out of that system and put the burden on the student and their families. And there's a way to fix that. Okay. First of all, we have to begin to again invest in public education at the highest level in a way that makes education affordable. And we have to find a way to lift the crushing burden of debt that we have put on young people in this country. So there has to, first of all, if you're borrowing money from the federal government, you should not be paying interest. Students are not profit centers. Often it is the interest on the debt that continues people in the cycle of not being able to pay off those loans. There has to be a component of debt forgiveness in this country. It has to be equitable to ensure that folks that were able to put themselves through college are treated fairly. But there is no question that if we can afford to give trillions and trillions of dollars to profitable corporations when they, have 2 weeks without customers, we can invest in our young people. And we also have to revitalize career training. It's something that we used to excel in, as
Thank
Dan
you.
said. Yep.
Thank you, David. Sydney Bonnier.
Yeah, so I have been an employee of Florida Gulf Coast University for more than 6 years. And something that's dismayed me quite immensely about both this university and other universities across the country is the disproportionate amount of pay and staff at the higher echelons in the university. So we have people who have very, let's say, imprecise job titles, making 6 figures a year. And what their jobs largely are is bringing more money into the university in terms of philanthropic dollars and grant dollars and things of the like. And that is often to supplement what they lost out in federal funding. To make this problem even more of a complicated issue, there are people like me who have a PhD, yet are getting paid a pittance and not even offered a tenure track position. And we are the ones that are teaching the students for the most part. And there are people who have only half a master's degree that are teaching undergraduate classes. And they don't even have somebody like me who has a PhD. It's just, you got half a master's, we can pay you a third of what we're going to pay a tenure track faculty. So cost savings on us, but we're going to keep paying the higher echelon people. And so I think that if we have better public investment into the universities, realizing that this is a fortification of our workforce, that we will be better served and we can take that burden off of individuals and remove the need to have that overhead thing that brings students in and is the gilded part.
Thank you so much. And Christie McLaughlin.
I was the victim of discrimination due to my political beliefs in school, in a public university. Universities are indoctrination institutions with leftist professors that have complete and total control over the future of the students. Colleges have monopolized careers, essentially, or having successful careers. We are now living in a culture in which, as a Gen Zer who is fresh out of school, I could tell you that we have a culture that you are required to have a college education and experience in order to have a successful career in the United States. Therefore, universities that are indoctrinating students have an absolute monopoly on successful futures and the livable circumstances of individuals who go through that system. Student debt has increased by 500% since 1999. And the concept of free college for all and free education for all is a political ploy because it's only going to increase that influence and control that colleges have. So the solution is to actually remove the incentives. There is no incentive. You actually have to make the colleges accountable, be transparent, and also create a competitive environment and the monopolies and a competitive environment in which colleges are priced according to the sustainability of the student.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates. That was our only question around college affordability. We will now be covering affordable housing. Housing insecurity has become a prevalent issue in the state of Florida, specifically in District 19. The cost of living has driven many working class folks out of this area. The first question is, if there's one thing that this pandemic has shown us, is that the affordable quality housing is an essential human right. Families should not have to choose between feeding their young, paying rent. which is too often the case. Providing affordable housing is directly tied to homelessness, yet leadership has not addressed the growing issue of homelessness. How do you propose tackling this issue of affordable housing in Congress? This question goes to Dan Severson.
I had mentioned earlier that we have Ben Carson, who has been doing some innovative work in housing and urban development. And he's been doing a kind of a parade or a train around the nation addressing those needs. And it's a very real issue, particularly I think here in South Florida, where you have a very migrant person population that is addressing some of the needs of our agriculture and some of those things. So I think, again, the federal government can help out, but it really becomes a community issue. And to me, the faith-based community is really poised within the communities themselves to address these situations and create an atmosphere of acceptance and giving. So if there were anything that I would advocate the federal government to do as a congressman in my district, it would be to help undergird those faith-based initiatives, those churches and those community gatherings that come together to address those homeless situations. And we have those here in Fort Myers. We have a number of them. So if we can, as a community, come together to address those needs, I think that's what the real answer is, because once you have neighbors who know their neighbors, they become caring and they will make sure that they're taken care of. So I would advocate specifically for more federal dollars to be available to those faith-based initiatives.
Thank you. Christie McLaughlin.
So the issue with affordable housing is that many states and many markets that have the most severe shortages in affordable housing are the ones that have the most restrictions through the state, federal, and local regulations that create barriers to development. And typically speaking, about more than 25% of the cost of a new home is due to the direct result of a federal, state, and local regulation. So the President Trump actually directed a council through the Housing and Urban Development Committee, or the Housing and Urban Development Council, that action be taken to reduce the federal regulations. Because if we reduce barriers to create and build affordable housing, we're actually going to have more access. And with more access comes more competition, the lowering of prices, and more availability for citizens.
Thank you. Cindy Bonnier.
Yeah, no, both of those answers were some of the most outlandish things I've heard in my entire life. I used to run a homeless service organization in this community for 4 years. Homeless people call me every single day. There's nothing for them here. There is no services. All the shelters are full. There are no houses. And it has nothing to do with regulations. Actually, we have one of the most desirable environments for development. But developers come here and they build high rises and $1 million, condos, and they build gated communities with golf courses, because that's what makes money. Affordable housing isn't sexy, it isn't fun, and it doesn't make a lot of money, especially in a beach community. So what we really need in order to make sure that we have not only just housing that's affordable, but workforce housing for people who are, firefighters and teachers, because that's what it means to live in a community and be a regular person and not just somebody who has a bunch of money. We need to make sure that those are affordable places by subsidizing and encouraging and making sure that there are appropriate components in the regulations, both at the local and state and federal level, that encourage people to not just go hog wild and build $1 million condos when there are people who have to drive 2 hours to make a $30,000 a year job happen. And that's exactly what happens here in Southwest Florida. And as somebody who has actually tried to build affordable housing, I will tell you that it's set up against the regular people who even want to do this.
Thank you so much. And finally, David Holden.
Faith can move mountains, but I still have to bring a shovel. And until 1981, the federal government considered it an obligation to invest heavily in public housing. Since that time, we have continued to drain resources from housing to transfer it up to the 1% of the 1% in the form of tax cuts and the slashing of marginal tax rates. If we want to address homelessness, we have to bring resources to bear, public investment. There are organizations like Habitat for Humanity who are doing a fabulous job on a shoestring, but they can't do it alone. Southwest Florida, Cindy is absolutely right. It's a developer's dream. And it has huge negative impacts, not just on the price of housing, but on our environmental crises that we're facing. If we want to address affordable housing, then we have to invest federal dollars, and I will make that a priority as a member of Congress.
Thank you, candidates. This concludes our long answer portion. Thank you all. We will now be hearing from Pamela Ramon.
Hi, candidates. So this will be a round of rapid response. So you will have 10 seconds to answer. And we are asking for a thumbs up or a thumbs down. A thumbs up is yes, and a thumbs down is no. And we'll be going in reverse alphabetical order for this round. So, should children crossing the border with their parents be separated? Dan. Christy. David. Cindy. Moving on to the next question. Are trans rights human rights? Dan. Christy.
It depends on what you mean, but yes.
David. Cindy. Thank you. So our third question, does every American deserve affordable housing? Dan. Christy.
Again, it's your questions. I got to question your question. Deserve affordable housing, we need to create it and make it available, but to just grant it through a federal level, no.
David. Cindy. Okay, and our last question for rapid response, do you support decriminalizing marijuana? Dan.
Yes and no.
Christy. David. Cindy. Okay, so that concludes our last round of rapid response. And we will be hearing from Pamela next.
Thank you. Thank you. We're actually going to, because we have some time left over, we're going to ask the audience to write in some questions in the chat box. And with those questions, we will ask the candidates here what you'd like to, what you would like them to answer. So we'll give you a little bit of time, but please feel free to put it into the chat box. In the meantime, while people are thinking of questions, we have one question that just came in. The question is, do you think our Florida environment, especially the water, would be such a priority if it were not so closely tied to the economic health of our state? And we'll give that question over to Cindy Banye.
Yeah, no, the answer really is no. I don't think anybody in the state of Florida would be caring about the environment and the water if it wasn't so closely tied to our economy. I mean, it is tied to our economy, and still there are years and years of negligence happening at the state level. And even, we see that with our federal representatives as well. And it's a travesty because this is the future of our environment, and it's something that our children and our grandchildren will need moving into the future to sustain themselves. It's about quality of life and health, because all of these pollutants that can get down into our aquifer affect our bodies. They go into the air, they affect our bodies. And so no, I don't think that there's been a big enough priority on it in years past. Even though it is a vital part of our economy, it actually took the destruction of that part of our economy because of the red tide and the blue-green algae for many people on the local level to even really recognize that we have to do something about it, that we have to invest in it, that we need the proper information, that, yeah, hey, those environmentalists with their protections, they might have something to say, because now it's actually hitting me in the pocketbook. So I've been disappointed in that, and I don't think it would be even close to as much of a priority as it is now, because it hasn't been a priority in the past.
Thank you. Dan Severson?
You know, I think the environmental issue is we are called to be stewards of our environment. Nobody wants dirty water. Nobody wants dirty water. It's just what is going to be required to address the situation. So if you have farmers who have cattle that are grazing in the river, and by the way, they're also doing their number in the river, that's a problem. And so we have to be able to enforce those issues to create a buffer, riparian buffer between those point sources and the actual bodies of water. And so those are things that take some initiative, they take some attention. And unfortunately, not everybody's going to think that that's a high priority. So really, I think for us, it should be, the priority should be, we are stewards of the land. We need to make sure that the things we do aren't harming our waters, but they are actually helping clean up the waters.
Thank you. Christy?
The clean water issue is an investment on a federal level because it affects interstate commerce. But from just a personal perspective, of course, it's beyond the issues with the economy. People's healths were affected by the blue-green algae bloom and the red tide. People had respiratory issues. And then just the general welfare and safety due to the toxins in our waters were highly disastrous in our area. So of course it goes beyond the issues of the economy. So on the federal level, it is affecting interstate commerce, but for the safety of the individuals within Southwest Florida.
Thank you. David Holden?
Yeah, sadly, I think if we were not so dependent on our environment, it would not be such a priority. But of course it must be, because there's no planet B. This is the only one we've got. And we are doing a terrible job as stewards of this planet. And I think part of the problem is we've become so polarized politically around these issues. Science has been denigrated, expertise has been treated as something that is somehow un-American, when the fact is we have addressed these issues. In the 70s, the EPA was established, the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act were passed and signed into law by Republican President Richard Nixon. And those laws and the EPA made tremendous strides in cleaning up our environment. We are reversing those gains. We are seeing terrible losses across the board in ecosystems and water quality. We have millions of Americans who do not have ready access to clean water. And much of this can be traced to the underlying political corruption of how our campaigns and lobbyists are financed.
Thank you. Another question that we have that recently came from our Facebook Live is this. What are your thoughts on campaign finance reform? And do you think candidates should be allowed to give themselves loans to finance their campaigns? I'll start off this question with Dan Severson.
I would like to see, particularly in Florida, some campaign finance reform in terms of, well, and at the federal side, because when we have millionaires who are throwing a lot of their own money into it, and then you have other campaign people that are trying to do a public service, it puts us at a disadvantage because we don't have the funds to be able to put our ads on TV. So I believe that if you're really wanting to serve in a political office, that you need to get the support of the people to be able to run that race. And in order to do that, you have to get out and talk to people, and you have to generate their trust and their support, both financially and emotionally. So I would be in favor of finance reform.
Thank you. Christy?
When it comes to finance reform, we have to remember that any political office does not belong to a politician. It belongs to the people. And that person who holds that seat serves the community that they represent. So when it comes to finance reform, it is essential because it's not from the candidate's perspective, it's from the voter's perspective, that it creates barriers of the democratic process, of having a wide and diverse range of candidates that can participate in an election. And that participation allows voters to make a sincere and true choice of who they want to represent them, rather than individuals buying their way through a race and buying a seat through commercials and through affording the required payment in getting your name on the ballot.
Thank you. Move over to David Holden.
Yeah, so political corruption is one of my top issues. I've been talking about it for 3 years on the campaign trail, and you know, political corruption is not somebody handing a candidate or an office holder a sack of money. It's the unlimited dark money that has flooded into our campaign system since the Citizens United decision. So I support public funding of elections. We need to have an even playing field. Having said that, you know, my wife and I have loaned some money to this campaign, but the vast majority of our money has been raised by small dollar donors across this community and across this country. I don't accept corporate PAC money. I think that that has a tremendously negative impact, not just on campaigns, but on elections and on the policy work that's done afterwards. We've got 2 multimillionaire candidates in this race. Neither of them are here with us this evening. And if either one of them wins, that would be the 4th member of Congress in a row this district has elected based on the amount of money that they could spend on the race.
Thank you. And Cindy Vanier.
Yeah, absolutely right. To David's point that we have millionaires throwing millions of dollars into this race of their own money. And as the only 100% grassroots funded person in this race who has not put any significant contribution into their campaign, because I don't have it, because I'm a single mom and I'm just trying to get by day to day. So I do rely on campaign contributions, small campaign contributions, and I'm coming up on almost 1,000 individual donors. Now, the level of work that goes into that really significantly detracts from my ability to talk to people about issues in our community. So I also believe that we need to have some sort of public funding option for campaigns to make sure that people have the ability to get into the race. I actually led a bipartisan coalition of candidates, 51 candidates across the state of Florida, advocating for fair elections and a reduction in the qualification fees, particularly amongst the coronavirus issue here. But we have the highest qualification fees in the United States when it comes to congressional representatives. And it's nothing more than a barrier and allows for people to buy these seats, just as David had said. I also believe that it's important to not take corporate influence into the race. So that's why the Citizens United has been such a detrimental decision. And I am also taking the pledge to not take any corporate PAC dollars. I am making partnerships with other organizations that support candidates like me, like No Dem Left Behind, Run Red to Blue, and Women for the Win. However, it shouldn't be this hard for qualified candidates to run this race.
Thank you.
Sorry, I lost the time.
Thank you. We'll move on to another question that was asked over in the Facebook Live. The question is, what are solutions to COVID and thoughts on reopening the environment? We'll start off with David.
You know, if I had the answer to solutions for COVID, I'd be probably on a bigger program. But we do know that we have utterly failed in our response at the national level, and at the state level, we're not far behind. The idea that without adequate testing, which we lack, without contact tracing, without isolating those that are infected, we are putting ourselves and those we care for and our communities at grave risk. I was stunned and shocked to see the number of reopen demonstrations going on around the country. I mean, it's just based on absolute selfishness and ignorance. We can expect a second wave. It is going to be devastating, especially when we have leadership at the top sending mixed messages, misinformation, and being unwilling and unable to tell the truth to the American people. We have 4% of the world's population and over 25% of the deaths. Now I think we're up to 85,000 dead Americans, and that could have been reduced severely, drastically, if we'd taken proper actions when we had the opportunity to do so.
Thank you. Move on to Dan Severson.
I think President Trump has shown phenomenal leadership in this process halfway through January while he was being impeached by an agenda-driven impeachment process. He shut down travel from China which the Democratic leadership said that was ludicrous. He was being xenophobic. He was being a racist. And now we see that he has saved literally hundreds of thousands of lives because he acted properly, because he acted in the best interests of the American population. But he's not just done that. He's now put down a pathway in which we can actually reopen, because the cure is turning out to be worse than the actual disease itself. We've got people who are depressed. We've got the economy, which is struggling to maintain a strong economy that came in. And now the longer we stay closed, the more people you're going to find who are become despondent. They lose hope that they're going to be able to go back to their jobs. And those are very real issues, as much as the COVID-19 is. So I think he's put a path forward that gets us to open up. And Governor DeSantis has put a great program together, which is a three-step process that was put down by the federal government that I think has opened up the state earlier. If you take the successes as opposed to some of the other states like New York or Michigan, you'll see that we've been ahead of the curve in terms of being able to open up our society and begin to put people back to work. It's something that is not easy, but it needs to be done.
Thank you. We'll move on to Sydney.
Yes, so as the mother of a vulnerable child, I will be staying home. And I think that we need to take this kind of consideration for all vulnerable Americans. We have, there she is now. We have this response by the Trump administration will go down in history as the biggest failure. And I say that as a data analyst who has been watching the trends. In the state of Florida, we have not had truth and transparency. Oh my Lord, I'm so sorry about my kids, but we have not had truth and transparency when it comes to data. We don't actually know how many people in the state of Florida have been tested because these are coming in batches. We don't know how many people have died because that information has been withheld from us. The coordination that we needed from the federal level down did not happen. There are states and countries around in this world who are protecting their citizens much better than we have. It is a shame what has happened in this country when it comes to the coronavirus. And despite the fact that my child is in the background screaming and interrupting just about every single thing I do as a single mom working from home and trying to run a campaign, I love her dearly. And I know that everybody in the country who has vulnerable family members, they love them dearly too. And we need to work to protect them. We need to make policy, and we expect our leaders to be truthful in the data that they give us and protect us and make policy and coordinate and do their job.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll move on to Chrissy.
So I've always been an advocate for opening up the economy, but I have spoken so much on this issue. It is all over my website. It is all over all of my social media. If you want my thoughts on that, please visit my website. I think that will set us on the right path for opening up the economy. And a note on having vulnerable people in your family. I have a 101-year-old great grandma who lives with me, and she's in favor of opening up the economy as well, because it's a matter of individual liberties and individual responsibility. And as David Holden pointed out, he does not know the solution to the coronavirus, but individuals do know how to sustain themselves and to protect themselves. Now, the solution and the main issue that we're facing is holding China accountable. President Trump has done a phenomenal job in the preventative measures, especially given that even Dr. Fauci himself said that the COVID-19 virus was not something to be concerned about. But President Trump made proactive measures to protect citizens in the United States by banning travel from China. But China is an aggressor. They knew the threat of the virus. They were not only negligent, but deliberate in allowing travel, not allowing travel within China, but preventing travel, but allowing travel out of China to other foreign countries, knowing the threat. They knew and withheld the fact that it was a human-to-human transition, and they hoarded PPE. We need to hold China accountable for $1 trillion. That debt that we owe to China needs to be forgiven.
Thank you. Another question that's been asked is, do these candidates have any thoughts on how to fix Florida's horrendous unemployment situation? So do you have any plans on how to fix this unemployment situation? We'll start off with Dan Severson.
I believe that in our local community and in the Congressional District 19 has some amazing opportunities here. We've got the Everglades Airport, which is the new potential development center that's even in works now that really becomes a distribution center, not too far from Lee County, Collier County, that will provide a lot of quality jobs, and developing that and getting the private sector to invest in those. And then as your congressman, I will go to Washington and I will recruit those industries that are commensurate with building up the central Florida area to do the manufacturing jobs, because we have the talent, we have the personnel here available in Central Florida. We just need the opportunity. And I think the Everglades Park Airport is a great opportunity to do that. So that's going to be number one on my economic opportunities agenda of my Severson 7. If you want to take a look at those, go to my website, seversonforcongress.com.
Thank you. Sydney?
Everglades is not in our district. So I love that we have
But
a
it's
region.
close.
It's not in our district. It's in
It's
Henry.
close. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's okay. So you had your time. Thank you. So I believe that we have a regional workforce, but the problem with the unemployment situation right now is that we're in the middle of a crisis that was exacerbated by a failure of leadership from the top down, Trump down to DeSantis. And we can also throw in the fact that we have individual people and families who are hurting because of the failed unemployment system. They can't even get the payments because Rick Scott wanted to hide how many people were being unemployed in the last recession, okay? So here's the thing that we need to do. We need to make sure that we take efforts to stop the spread of the coronavirus right now, that we can get out of this phase 0 and 1 and into where we can actually open the economy to where people can go back to work and also engage in the economy without fear. But we actually need to diversify the economy in Southwest Florida and not rely on people coming from the outside to make investments. Because if you take a look at the last time we had a headquarters that relocated here, Hertz, they're looking at Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is going to severely negatively affect our economy. We need to focus on small businesses and supporting small businesses, which make up 91% of the economy of the businesses in Southwest Florida.
Thank you. Christy?
So what Cindy just said and what I heard was open the economy. She did say that that would be the solution because we have a tremendous amount of unemployment from people being laid off and furloughed due to this COVID-19 pandemic and shutting down and forcing quarantine on citizens. We have had a tremendous amount of small businesses that have had to shut down permanently. That is going to be the worst impact on the unemployment rate here in Florida. So the solution is to open up the economy. Let small businesses get back on their feet. Let the American worker get back on their feet, because that is what's going to create stability in Florida.
Thank you. David?
First, let me just say that's not remotely what Cindy said. And let's also address the problem at hand. I know there are people watching this forum who have been waiting weeks and weeks and weeks to get their unemployment claims filled. And that's not gift money. That's money that we invest in our own future for our own protection when we are employed. We have, if not the worst, the 49th worst unemployment system, and that's exactly how it was designed. Meanwhile, we keep transferring trillions of dollars to the donor class and the well-connected. We have to make sure that people have enough money to eat, to pay their bills, to pay their rent, to take care of their children. We will address reopening the economy when it is safe to do so. And guess what? It's not going to reopen. It's not magic. People have made it clear in polling that they're very concerned about their health and the health of their communities, and they're going to stay home until it's safe. That's when the economy will reopen. And we can invest in jobs, really good manufacturing jobs, because if it isn't clear that we need to bring vital manufacturing back to this country, it should be now. So first, let's make sure that folks get what they need from the unemployment system, that they get their own money and money that we've set aside for that to be paid. Let's do that first, and then we'll deal with the rest later.
Thank you very much. We have one last question from the audience, and this is, Native American student data is often skewed by broad generalizations or left out. There's a typo. Left out by national education statistics. Are Native American / Indigenous communities important for the education system locally and federally? We will start this question off with David.
You got to run that again. That was a complicated question. Can you read that?
I'll
again,
reread it.
please?
I'll reread it. Native American students' data is often skewed by broad generalizations or left out by national education statistics. Are Native American/Indigenous communities important for the education system locally and federally?
Okay. So there are many things that we can be proud of as Americans, but the way we have treated Native communities is not one of them. And this has been going on for a very, very, very long time. Native communities have borne the deaths from COVID in the Native communities are the highest of any community in this country. Educational attainments and opportunities in Native communities, not just here in Florida, but nationally, run way behind every other demographic. I think we have to do a better job of investing in those communities, supporting those communities, making sure that they have the resources to determine their own path forward.
Thank you. We'll move on to Dan Severson.
It's a great question. And I think in terms of educational opportunities, as I said previously, every individual deserves equal justice under the law. They have equal opportunities. And where we see a lack of equal opportunity, those need to be addressed. And there are a number of institutions that are between the actual tribe and the tribal leaders and Washington, D.C., which need to be reviewed and need to be shrunk down because there's too many people with their fingers in the pie that aren't responsive to the needs of those American Indian tribal gatherings there. And so they've got to go through a ton of bureaucracy. We need to trim that down so that those agencies are much more responsive to their constituency.
Thank you. Christy?
The issue here is not about differing identities and separating the classes and groups of people. This is about providing enough educational opportunities, for, like creating equal opportunity, the same opportunity for all students. And that goes back to what I had said previously on the K through 12 issue. We need to go back to the local and state control for K through 12 education, mainly because the federal control with Common Core and other forms of this nebulous government control over our K through 12 system is actually detrimental compared to the actual direct contact that local communities have with their students. And as for universities, what I've said about indoctrination institutions and how colleges can handpick who is going to have a successful career in the future, the issue is then not creating more incentives for colleges to have discriminatory regulations and policies. We create less incentives for universities and make them more competitive and have a more equal playing field.
Thank you. And lastly, but not least, Sydney Banye.
Yeah, there's one thing that I can say in the state of Florida. I have done a significant amount of research in our state education databases, as well as with our local data and census data. And we have a pretty good understanding of where our Indigenous communities live and how they fare into the education system. And in District 19 itself, we do not have a significantly high Indigenous population. And I can understand how that can seem like people are being overlooked because they are a small portion of this population. I will say in the broader Southwest Florida region overall, some of the areas where we have some of the best education statistics at the school level are in the reservation areas. I had worked on the Promise Neighborhood Grant application that included Hendry and Glades County. And that's one thing that we had learned through that process is going through is that areas where that were Indigenous controlled schools actually perform better than the other areas. And so I think that we need to have a recognition of all the different types of people in our schools and to understand how they are treated and how they compare to other groups of students. I know, for instance, that we have a huge equity gap in graduation rates between students of color and white students. And that's something I absolutely want to address at the federal level.
Thank you. Thank you. I will be moving it on to the other Pamela for the candidates to make their closing remarks, but thank you very much for answering the audience questions. For the closing remarks, you'll only be getting a minute and a half, so keep that in mind. Thank you.
Pamela, your microphone's off.
Okay, I'll say that again. All right, so for closing remarks, we'll begin reverse alphabetical order, 1.5 minutes, and we'll begin with Dan.
Thank you so much for putting this little forum together. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with the other candidates, and I'm sorry that the other candidates weren't able to make it in this good discussion. I'm Dan Severson, running Top Gun Navy fighter pilot. I had 22 years defending the Constitution of what we had talked about here today, which are individual rights and liberties. And many of my shipmates ended up not coming home. So the whole Constitution and our liberties are precious to me. So I appreciate the ability to talk openly with this discussion tonight. I also was 8 years in the legislature. I served both the majority and the minority. And so I got to see both sides and work both sides of the aisle. I came together on issues that we could agree with, and we got good legislation passed. That's my goal for District 19, is to go to Washington and be the voice of every individual in CD 19, not just the rich and not just the poor, but every individual who has a desire to see the freedoms and liberties our founding fathers guaranteed each one of us. And so my goal will be to get out there, meet you, talk with you, and understand what your concerns are. I'm Dan Severson, running for the congressional seat 19. I have a website, seversonforcongress.com. I'd love it if you'd go to the page, take a look at it, and if you have questions, get a hold of me, and we can discuss those, and then we can get together, and I'd love to have you working on my campaign. Thanks so much for having this get together tonight. This was awesome, and be blessed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Christy?
All right, thank you all so much. My name is Christie McLaughlin. I am a firm believer in the democratic process, so I want to just thank you guys so much for putting this debate on. And regardless of if we disagree on certain issues, this is what democracy is about, and that is sharing your thoughts and making it clear and transparent as to what you intend to do in Congress. I very proudly jumped into this race because I'm a lifelong Southwest Florida resident. I'm not a career politician. I am a young woman who has lived and breathed the issues of Southwest Florida every day of my life. To have a representative for the people, you have to be one with the people, have the experience of being just an everyday working American. So that said, I am very proud to be a Latina, Catholic, certified teacher and lawyer who's ready to jump into Congress and represent young people, bring innovation and new perspectives into Congress. Please visit my website, christieforcongress.com. The phone number on there, you can text me and I always answer. And then actually very recently, I started doing TikToks and I'm actually kind of popular on TikTok. So please follow me there. It is Christie McLaughlin 2020.
Thank you. David?
Thank you. Thank you for organizing this forum, and I thank my fellow candidates for participating. It's been a wonderful evening. So here we are. We have a pandemic and we have an unbelievable economic catastrophe before us. Neither of these two crises are going to end anytime soon. But within those crises are the seeds of opportunity. And we have the opportunity to build a new American dream together, more inclusive, that invests resources not in those who are well connected and super wealthy, but in working Americans, to guarantee healthcare for every American, a living wage, paid sick leave, access to a good quality, affordable education. This is how we're going to build a new economy, and this is how we're going to build a new America. We need to do that in a way that is sustainable. So we have to invest in green jobs. We have to start to wean ourselves from our addiction to fossil fuels. And we had to free ourselves from the political corruption, not just the billions of dollars that are spent on campaigns that we know very little about, but the billions of dollars that are then spent on lobbying the folks that are elected. We can have a new birth of freedom in this country, and we can do that together. Please go to holdenforflorida.com and get involved in our campaign. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cindy?
Yes, thank you so much for holding this forum for us. I was very disappointed that we didn't have it in person as we had planned several weeks ago, but I so appreciate your efforts to move us to this virtual technology, our new world and our new way of communicating with each other in these times. And thanks for the candidates who showed up, and those who didn't, well, we'll see them next time around. I want to say that as somebody who has lived in Southwest Florida for the past 11 years, I chose to come here and build my family here and build my career here because it's a beautiful place. And because there are so many people here who care about their community as well. I've been invested as a community development expert and as somebody who has worked to make sure that voices in the community are heard. That is the purpose of the U.S. House of Representatives, to be the voice of the people. I am somebody who will take those practices as a community organizer and community development specialist into Congress. You will always have a place. You will always be able to reach me. I will always be fighting for you. And if you check out my latest ad, which you can see on my YouTube channel, you will see me say, send mama to Congress to fight for you. I am a fighter. I'm a former professional boxer. I've been practicing in my garage this whole time during our COVID, sequestering. But I am happy to go and fight for you in Washington, D.C. I would love if you could check out my website, cindy4swfl.com, at Southwest Florida, SWFL Mom 2020, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as well. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. So we will now hear our closing from Fleener Coffee.
Thank you so much, Pamela. I want to thank candidates. I want to thank our audience for giving us questions. The Florida Student Empowerment Network would like to thank you, each one of you, for taking the time out of your day to discuss issues that matter to young people across District 19. The youth are our future, so making the effort to pay attention to the challenges and situations we live through will be a vital skill in fairly representing your constituents. After this town hall, we ask that you please consider the topics covered and further your understanding on subjects you may not understood as well prior to this event. During the unprecedented time, it is important that we stay safe, healthy, and informed. We wish each one of you these three things. Thank you and good luck with your primaries. And also, if you are interested in Florida Student Power Network, if you yourself are young people, please fill out our pledge cards, which should be in the chat section. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank you.